Hi, welcome to this class on wood embroidery. My name is Liz Olson and I run the Etsy store Bella Collective, where I design SVG files for laser owners. One of the main things I focus on is actually wooden embroidery patterns. To be honest, before owning a laser, I had never embroidered before, so I learned as I went, and I'm here to say it is not that hard. So if you have never embroidered before, that is totally fine. We're going to cover all the basics of stitching, from your first stitch to the different knots to make, and then all the materials you'll need to complete your project. We are going to complete two different patterns. So we have the adult floral pattern that just uses one basic stitch, and then we have a matching kids version, which is made with yarn. So I recommend this for any kiddos ages 6 and up. And then this is great for teens through adults. All right, without further ado, let's jump in. So once you have your patterns printed out on your wooden material, you can actually use acrylic if you want. This is a 1/4 inch, but if you have 1/8 inch, the thickness doesn't really matter. The most important thing actually is just to get these score lines printed on the patterns. So this, you can tell here, you'll know exactly where to stitch because the lines have been scored. So I do this on all of my patterns, kids included, just to make life a lot easier, and then you don't just see a bunch of holes and don't know where to stitch. So let's talk through what we're going to need for the adult pattern. You're going to want to pick up some 6-strand embroidery floss. So DMC brand is kind of the go-to for craft stores. I highly recommend this over like an Amazon brand or a generic, just because it's a lot easier to thread and it doesn't get tangled as easy. So you can see here that there are 6 different strands. And I usually sew with all 6. You can, if you want to make it easier to thread the needle, you can just take this down to maybe 3 or 4, but I typically will use the whole 6 strands. I like to store my floss on these little clothespins. I'll wrap an entire skein at a time so that things don't get tangled, and then I will write the number on the end of the clothespin. So if you see here, each of these threads has this particular number. They're not named by color, they go by number. So this will just tell me if I'm running low on this clothespin, I'll know which number to add to my shopping list. And I just think it looks kind of cute for pictures. You'll want to make sure you have a sharp pair of scissors or snips. So you can use any scissors really, but the sharper, the better. It'll just make your life a lot easier when you have to go to snip all those little threads. So for needle sizes, you're going to want to pick a number 5 embroidery needle. So you can pick these up at just about any craft store like Joann's or Michael's. Sometimes Walmart will even carry them. So they're a really common size. And you can see here, they're pretty thin needles, but you can see the eye. It's a lot wider than a standard sewing needle. So it makes it a lot easier to fit 6 strands of floss. All right, the last thing, and this is optional, but I usually get self-adhesive felt. So you can see here it's got a sticky back to it. And what this is for is once you're done sewing, I'll kind of show you what the back side of my pattern looks like, but it's pretty messy with a bunch of threads. So what you can do then is cover all those messy threads with some felt or other thin material. It's really just up to you. I like this because it's self-adhesive and it just makes my life easier. And this can actually be cut on a laser. So I usually just hand cut it. It's not perfect, but if you care about that, if you want a perfect circle, you could just cut this out on your laser. All right, let's talk about what we're going to need for the kids' yarn pattern. So I shop at Joann's usually and pick up their Big Twist brand. You can use any brand of yarn. This is probably the least expensive, and they have a really good variety of colors. So needles for the kids' patterns. I base my patterns off of this DMC brand 2.75 inch plastic needle. So you can see here, I have this other plastic needle I got on Amazon, and it was supposedly the exact same size as the DMC brand, but you can see here the eye is a lot wider. Now I base my patterns off of this size, but I do make the holes a little bit bigger just in case somebody has a wider needle. So this, you'll see, will still fit through the hole, but you might, it's able to be held there, so you'll have to pull it through, whereas the DMC will just slide through nicely. So you'll also want scissors, and then I don't typically cover the back with felt, mainly because I market these as reusable for kids. So technically the adult patterns are also reusable, but I feel like kids are more likely to want to cut their thread out, choose different colors, so I like to not have them have their yarn glued in, but just make it easy to cut right out if they want to change something. So now it's time to thread our needle, and I typically stitch stems first. So we're going to start with green, and I measure, I'm not particular with exact measurements, but what I like to do, you can't see off screen here, but I'm going to measure out pretty much my wingspan length worth of this thread. So once you have that marked off, then I snip it. And we're going to go ahead and thread our needle. So what I'm doing now, I'm licking the thread and then I flatten it with my teeth. So let's see if it'll focus on this. So what I did, you can see here, it's kind of flattened down to make it easier to fit through the eye. So this is going to take some practice. Don't worry if it's frustrating at first. You'll see here, this is actually going to take me more than one try. Sometimes if you're having a lot of trouble, I do suggest just snipping off the end and starting over. You can see it kind of got a little unravelly, so I'm going to go ahead and wet it and flatten it with my teeth and then bring it back over here and try to put it through. All right, that worked. So I've got it held firmly against my finger and I'm just going to pinch that end and pull it through. So now that we're threaded, I'm going to show you how I do my first stitch. So like I said, I usually start with the stems and stitch those first. The reasoning for that is whatever stitch goes on last, so this hole right here is going to have the stem color and also the leaves. Now they're going to be the same color for this pattern, but because I'm going to stitch the leaf last, that color is going to be most prominent in this hole. And I don't really want the stems to be prominent. I want the leaves and the flowers. So that is why I start there. So this, I believe, is the outside. So what I'm going to do is I just went underneath the wooden pattern and I'm going to pull it almost all the way through. So you can see there, I just kind of pinched it with my back finger. And then we're going to go through this hole right here. So now that we have one stitch done on the front, I'm going to flip it over and just tie it. So I've tried a lot of different methods and this is honestly just the easiest. So this is hard to do on camera, but basically you're just going to tie a knot in this thread so that it will hold it against the wood. Okay, there we go. Now I have some extra and this tends to get tangly, so I will just snip that off. All right, now that we have this tied down, we're going to do the exact same thing for the kids' yarn pattern. So I'm going to pick this for our stem color and just kind of do about 1 arm's length worth of yarn. So I'm going to cut that off here. I'm going to grab one of our blue needles. And this is a little bit different for the kids. So the easiest way I've found is just to pinch the end with one hand and bring the needle to the yarn and just kind of wiggle it. So you can see here that just brought the yarn right through the eye. So with the embroidery floss, we do more bring the floss to the needle. But for this one, again, I'll show you, just pinch it with my finger, bring the needle close and wiggle the needle. And that works just about every time. So depending on the age of your child, I would either tie the string here or I would do what we did with the adult pattern. So if you feel like your child is old enough to know to pinch right here, then we can just leave it as is. And our first stitch is going to be the exact same. So we're going to bring it through our first 2 bottom stem holes, turn it over, and just tie it here. I'm going to drop my needle because this is hard to do. Okay. There we go. All right, so for these 2 patterns, we're going to use the exact same stitching method. So I'm going to show you how to do it on the adult pattern first, and then we'll come back to the yarn. So the method we're going to be using is called a back stitch. And what this means is we're going to come up through the back to the next open hole and pull the thread all the way through. And instead of going forward, we're going to go down back. So we just went backwards one hole. And you see this stitch means there's no open space. So again, we're going to come up through the next open hole, pull all the way through, and then we're going to go down through the back hole. So this last hole that we just came, there we go. And that's all there is to this. You just come up through the next open hole and back down through the previous hole. We'll do one more. We're going to come up through this hole and then down through the previous hole. That's it. It's not too hard, is it? So, okay, coming back over to the kids' yarn pattern. Same thing. We are going to come up through, we got that tail there, come up through this next open hole. And then we're going to go back down through the last hole. We're going to go up through this next open hole and down through the last hole. One more time, up through the open hole and down through the last hole. All right, that is literally all there is to backstitching. So why don't we go ahead and stitch this entire leaf section. I'm going to keep it the same color. So I'm going to do the entire stem and then I'm going to go back and do the leaves. So go ahead and stitch now until you come to the end of that green thread. So go ahead and pause, and then when you're ready to grab some new thread, restart the tutorial. All right, so I have come to just about the end of this thread here. So what you want to do is end where your thread is on the back side. So we pull it through. So here our thread is on the end. Now so take a look at what my back looks like. It is not pretty, and that's okay. No one is going to see it. So I'm getting ready to tie off again here. So I'll go back under and make a loop and pull my needle through the loop. So we do that twice. All right, so now we can cut this thread off and go ahead and pick the next thing to work on. I would suggest either doing this right hand leaf or doing the stems for this yellow branch. So whichever one is fine. Go ahead and measure out the same amount of thread. So I'm going to use this brown. We're going to do the yellow stem here. So I'm going to do a wingspan's worth. Oop, this one's trickier because the threads are split. Can you see that there? So I'm actually, instead of taking more time, I'm just going to cut that off. Re-wet it. And let's get it focused on here and try to put it through again. Oh, I think it almost all came. Let me just pull and see. Oh, actually, that is all in there. Perfect. Sometimes I will thread it and just like miss one or two threads, and it's so annoying. So because it's so split like this, I'm just gonna go ahead and cut that off anyway. And we're gonna pull the thread about halfway through. And let's see here, which stem is this? We're gonna say this next one over here. You know, it doesn't really matter. So I'm gonna do the first stitch here, and instead of tying it off to another piece of thread, we'll tie it to itself, which is much easier to do when it's sitting on something. Okay, we're going to cut this off. And we're going to go ahead and do, so it looks like there's two stems here. So this first one, and then this one that's branching off. So go ahead and just follow the line that's the center line. When you get to the end here, Those two are yellow. So stop at the bottom of those 3 holes right there. All right, I want to show you something really quickly here. So this is a little confusing. Sorry, this was my fault. So I made it look like the stem is supposed to go through this hole right here, but that's actually part of this trio of holes. Can you see that? So this trio is supposed to be yellow. So go ahead and just skip that hole with the brown and just do the base of the trios, or these 4. So each, if you can tell here, so these 4 are part of a flower, these 3 are part, and these 2. So we just need the stem to go through the base of all of those things. So right here, I skipped that other hole because that's supposed to go to the flower. All right, I don't know about you, but for me, about 1 arm's worth of string was needed for the stems here. So that means about 1.5 yards to 2 yards is all that you'll need for this brown stem. So now it's time for yellow. I'm already threaded here, and it looks like our first hole is down this way. Let's see if I can get it. Nope. Okay, so once you come up through that first hole, we're just going to do what we did in all the other ones, go down through the center, and then we are going to tie it off. Now, to be honest, I don't bother tying off a lot of times because I'm just so used to holding the base of the string with my bottom middle finger and doing a few stitches, and after you do a couple, this can't get pulled out anymore. So you know what, we're not going to tie it off. I'm just going to show you kind of what that means for me. So we just went down, we're going to finish these 4 flower, I don't know, would you call these petals? Okay, we're going to come up through this next petal, down through the center, and I'm still holding the yellow with my opposite hand. Nothing has moved. Okay, we're going to come up through the 3rd petal here, down through the center. And at this point, you might start to feel a little bit of pull on the threads as you're coming through this hole because it's getting full of thread. Hopefully it won't be too tight if you're using the number 5 needle. This should be just big enough for all these threads. Oops, wrong one. Okay, come down through this last one in the center here. Yeah, so even I'm having to push just a little bit to get that through. And now we've done it. So that is what this little baby flower is going to look like. We're going to continue this all the way up this stem and then up this following. All right, I want to show you now that I'm up towards where we were talking about earlier with leaving this hole open. So because the stem is directly on top of it, I don't want to split the stem thread. So I'm gonna, with my thumbnail, just gently scrape this over to the side so that when I come down through the middle here, there we go. It went on one side of the thread. So we'll go down through the middle. And so then that, I feel like that just looks neater. There we go. We'll come up through this one. Yeah, I like that versus splitting. So we'll do that again. I think we do that for right here. So I'll go ahead and do that one first. Ooh, pull it over. Not that one. Okay. I've chosen to come up on the right hand side. Okay, you can just kind of see, I like that the yellow thread is then on top of that brown one. And then also down here, just again, further reason why I do the stems first is because then the yellow kind of lays on top of the stem, and I want the yellow to be showing more than I want the brown. We just continued the back stitch for all of the stitches and for all of the rest of the ones in this pattern. So go ahead and pick what stem color you want for this daisy, stitch the daisy, and these other leaves. All right, now that we've come to the end of the stitching, I'm going to show you how to do this little bow on the bottom. So it's different in that we're not coming up from the back. We're actually going to start by going down through the front. So I'm going to, as best as I can, try to get to the right of all of these stitches and then pull my needle through and make sure a lot of this sticks out this end. And I'm going to hold it taut with my thumb. And as I flip it over, I'm going to try to push as many of these strings aside as I can so that I can come up as close to the left as possible. So you might need to wiggle a few things around. There we go. I'm trying not to split the threads here. I want the bow to make it look like it's holding all of the stems. Okay, so we're going to pull up here and kind of slide this. Perfect. So now you just go ahead and tie like you would tie a shoe. So I'm going to take the needle off and then go ahead and knot it. And tie a little bow. So I like to pull it pretty tight and then make these little bows. Oh, that's so perfect. Yes. So make them smaller. Here we go. And then as far as length, it's kind of up to you, just whatever look you like. I'm going to cut them right about here. And then you can kind of still like twist it around, kind of situate it how you like. But I think that's cute. All right, that is the end of this pattern. So at this point, you can decide if you want to put a backer on. So take a look at the messiness here. This is just how they're gonna look. Sometimes I get a little twisted, totally fine. So you can decide right now if you'd like to cover it up, see how that will cover everything, or leave it blank. So I like to use these as like little shelf sitters. I've seen people put holes. You can make a hole and kind of hang it from somewhere. There's usually space at the top for like a 3M sticky. That's what I recommend to hang this to a wall. There's also, you could use a magnet strip there, or as much in the center. Like we've got a nice little blank space here that I could glue on a magnet if you'd want to put this on the fridge. But a lot of people just use these like they would a regular embroidery piece. So now that you are incredibly used to doing backstitch, we're just going to complete this by doing backstitch the whole way. So remember, it's up through the front and then down through the last. Up through the next, down through the back. All right, now that we're nearing the end of this piece of yarn, we're going to tie off. There's a couple things you could do, whatever's easiest for your kiddo. You could either use this piece of string right here to tie off with, or you could do what we did at the adult pattern and pull your thread under one of the yarn pieces and then create this loop, go through the loop, and pull it tight. So with yarn, you actually really only have to do it one time and it makes a pretty tight knot. So now we can grab a new piece of yarn. All right, remember for threading, we bring the needle to the yarn and then wiggle the needle and the yarn should come through. And then for our first stitch, we'll just keep doing the back stitch here. We'll come down. And then we have options. We could tie the string to itself. We could tie it to this neighboring string, which is what I'll probably do. And cut the extras. And this is just good to keep going. So I'm going to go ahead and complete this piece. I'll use different colors for this stem and this flower, and then come back when it's finished. All right, here is what that completed flower looks like. Here is the back, which is super messy, but nobody needs to see that. So I think this would look really cute with maybe like a name engraved on it. You could also hang from any one of these holes and make like a little door sign or bedroom decor. For being just the very basic stitch, I feel like this looks really good and finished.